What's up everyone? My name is Connor and welcome to my channel where I read and talk about books. Today I'm going to be doing something a little different from my previous videos, but I do plan on it being a series that I post alongside my individual book rants. Back in August, I started a new job that allows me to wear headphones pretty much the entire time I work, so I've been listening to a ton of audiobooks with the Libby app, not sponsored. And while I only read 4 books during that month due to transitioning jobs and going through training and everything, I average about one and a half to 2 books per week. So I thought it would be nice to sort of briefly talk about the books that I did read and maybe rate them. And who knows, maybe if they sound like your cup of tea, you can also check them out. I also really like the idea of being able to take some time away from hate reading terrible books to have a more positive discussion of the books that I actually enjoyed or looked forward to reading, rather than only talk about the books that, I read specifically for the sake of tearing them apart. As I'm sure you've gathered from my channel name, I primarily read queer books since I am a queer man. So all of the books that I'm going to be covering today are books that I found in the LGBT plus tag of the Libby app. If that's not something you're interested, I don't really know why you're here in the first place, but I would hope my audience is queer or at the very least open-minded enough to consume queer content. If not, I don't know what to tell you. Then my channel is just not for you. Also, I know that by the time this video comes out, it's gonna be sometime in October. I do hope to be able to catch up with these videos so that I'm not talking about things that I read 2 to 3 months late. I just had a lot going on between reading The Age of Scorpius and Safety Measures, and I didn't have the time to make this video sooner. Lastly, as always, I just want to drop the disclaimer that reviews are for readers. I don't think that I'll have any trouble with catching flack from this video because everything that I read during this month were pretty much all bangers, but I do have some minor criticisms for some of the books that I read, and if you disagree with any of my opinions, that's fine. You're allowed yours and I'm allowed mine. If you don't like what I have to say, I do encourage you to close that window. And of course, same goes for authors or friends and family of the authors. This is simply my take on these books, and nothing that I say is meant for you. Alright, now that I have all of that out of the way, we can just jump right in. So first off, we have The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. Normally, I don't have physical hardcover books, but this is one of those books that where I just loved it so much that I just had to buy the physical copy of it, partially to, support the author. It would be nice to one day, have a setup like all the other booktubers do, where they have a bookshelf behind them and all their books on display. So eventually I would like to grow a collection to, be able to do that. And then also because this is one of those books where I became very obsessed with it very quickly, and no one else that I know also reads it. So another reason that I bought it is because my boyfriend Soren only reads physical books, and I really, really want him to read it so that I could have someone to talk to about it, because that is just how good this book was. Out of the 4 that I read during the month of August, this one was my favorite. This one was the absolute best. I'm a little insane about this book. The Jasmine Throne was just absolutely stunning. The world was so vibrant and rich and compelling from start to finish. This is a queer woman fantasy, which isn't something that I normally go out of my way to read. Of course, nothing against lesbians, but being a gay man, I'm usually more drawn to stories about other gay men. But the premise was just so interesting that I couldn't resist giving this one a shot, and I'm honestly so thankful that I did. One of the big things that drew me in was the fact that the author is an Indian woman, and it's heavily inspired by South Asian mythology. Over the last year, I've been trying to broaden my reading experiences by getting into stories written by people of color, and I found that these stories based on cultures outside of the sort of European Tolkien-esque setting that has become the standard in fantasy are so fun and unique and fascinating. This story follows follows primarily two main characters, but there are kind of like secondary characters that it, follows as well. But our first main character is Freya. Freya is a temple child turned maidservant after all her temple siblings were burned alive for having forbidden magic that was deemed too dangerous. Somewhere within the Harana, the temple she grew up in, is something called the Deathless Waters, where those of the temple risk their lives in order to emerge from the waters once, twice, and thrice born. Each time their magic becomes stronger, but each time they also run the risk of dying within the waters. Freya was just a child the night that she and her brother escaped the temple burning, and she's lost all of her memories of her time in the Harana, or she's lost most of the memories of her time within the Harana, as well as how to find the Deathless Waters. It's very interesting because the temple children, they kind of have this connection to nature and the earth, and the Deathless Waters, they move, the passages to them kind of like shift, and so in order to find the Deathless Waters, you have to have that connection to the earth to be able to seek it out, to make your way through. It's so interesting. The magic in this world is so interesting. I'm gonna try really hard to not butcher these words, obviously, because I'm not familiar with this language. But when the princess of Parajatvipa is exiled to the Harana, Freya takes a job that allows her to return to her home to try and recover her memories and locate the Deathless Waters. But she's not the only one searching for these waters. Rebels and freedom fighters of Ahiranya, her country, who are oppressed by Parajatvipa, want to free their country from the oppressive rule of the emperor, and in order to do that, they need to find these waters to gain more power from it. Our second main character is the princess of Parajatvipa, Malini. Malini was discovered trying to overthrow her tyrannical brother Chandra. In their religion, women are burned alive as a way to purify and immortalize them, and Chandra is a religious zealot. So when he finds out that his sister tried to remove him from the throne, he ordered her to be burned, but it had to be something that she willingly agreed to. So when she refused, he ordered her to be isolated in the Harana and reflect until she finally agrees to the pyre willingly. The two meet in the temple after Malini witnesses Freya survive an attack from a rebel seeking the Deathless Waters. She takes Freya as her personal maidservant when she realizes that Freya could be her ticket out. Throughout this story, Freya and Malini are forced to rely on each other in order to survive, and they have such an interesting dynamic. It doesn't start out the most healthy. They're both clearly using one another for their own benefit out of necessity, but over time they do develop real feelings for each other the more they spend time with each other and become more vulnerable. One of my favorite things about this book was the difference in how Freya and Malini viewed their own very complicated family dynamics. They both have older brothers who at one point within the story have hurt them, but while Freya's brother serves as an antagonist throughout the story, she still loves and cares for him despite his actions. While Malini is the opposite. She sees her brother as a monster and will do anything to see him removed from power. Freya had the kind of upbringing where she was trained to know how to fight and cause harm to people, but she chooses to not use that training against anyone unless absolutely necessary. Freya is such a kind and caring person. She doesn't want to hurt people, and the few times that she does, it's because, it's been out of survival because the other person forced her hand. Malini, on the other hand, is cunning and ruthless, and she isn't afraid to make hard choices necessary to ensure that she achieves her goal. She's justifiably angry at what her brother has put her through, but she still has moments of vulnerability, and there were several moments where, I felt she was very relatable. She's justifiably very angry. This book has a lot of feminine rage, which I love. I love feminine rage, and this book has good feminine rage. I also have a very complicated relationship with certain people in my family, and I feel like there's a lot of rhetoric in media surrounding this idea that family should be forgiven regardless of how they've hurt you because they're family and they're all that you have. But with Malini, it was like, no, he's a monster and I want that dead. And I really felt that to my core. The only complaint that I had about this book, which I need to make very clear was so minor, is that while Priya and Malini are the main focus, the story follows several other secondary characters, and I want to say that there were at least 5 other characters that we got POV chapters from. There were times, especially like in the beginning, it was a little hard to keep up with all these characters, but their chapters were absolutely necessary for building up the world and setting up the story and what it was going to be getting into. If we hadn't had all of those extra side character POVs, I feel like the story would not have hit as well as it did. So it was something that I kind of struggled with, like, oh, who's this person again? But at the same time, like, their chapters were necessary. It was very, very important for the build-up and the setup, and the payoff was so worth it. The romance between Priya and Malini in this first book was more of a minor subplot. It was not nearly as important to the overall story than I had originally expected, which I kind of like. Like, I love romance, but I also like it when there is more thought and energy put into the world and story as opposed to only focusing on the romance. This story spends a lot of time focusing on a lot of very tough themes such as religious conflict, colonization, oppression, sexism, family trauma, and revolution. This book gets 5 stars from me. If I could give it more, I absolutely would. The Jasmine Throne had me hooked the entire way through. Like, I really cannot stress how gorgeous this book is. If you're looking for a unique fantasy world with a fleshed out and complex story, I would absolutely give this book a chance. I desperately need more people to read this book because it was just so good. The next book on my list is Swordcrossed by Freya Marske. I can't remember I don't know if it's Freya Marske or Marske. This book is a gay romance about Matanesh J, the heir to a merchant family that is on the verge of going bankrupt. In order to save his family's business, he enters an arranged marriage, but the woman who he's promised to has a paramour. In order to prevent his rival from interrupting the ceremony by challenging Matanesh to a duel, he must hire a best man to fight in his place. Being too poor to afford a well-known swordsman, Matti has to settle for Luca Pierre, a charming con artist who is also talented with a blade. During the weeks leading up to the wedding, Matti has Lucas give him sword lessons, and not only do they start to grow closer, but Luca helps him uncover the mystery behind the events that have led to his family's rapid decline. I hadn't expected to like this book as much as I did. It is more of a cozy genre with low stakes, and there have been a couple books that I've tried to read like that in the past and just couldn't really get into. But in this case, it was very clear that the author did their research into wool trade, which is what his family specialized in, and I actually felt like I was learning about textiles and business practices in the process of reading, and it was laid out in a way that wasn't confusing or boring. I don't actually know anything about trade, and I feel like I had an easy time following along with what was happening. I know I've said in a past video that I prefer books that are heavy on character development and interactions. I can usually look past like a mediocre plot so long as the characters are compelling. This plot wasn't mediocre at all. It was still very interesting, but it focused heavily on the chemistry between Luca and Matti, and I loved every interaction between them. Matti is someone who struggles under unrealistic expectations that he places on himself. He's burdened himself with the responsibility of saving his family, and even though they absolutely would help take the load off his shoulders if he just asked, he hides just how overwhelmed and pressured he feels at this impossible task that he's taken on. Meanwhile, Luca is running from something he did in the past. He's a bit of a f***up, and he's the exact opposite of Matti, where when the weight of his responsibilities gets too heavy, he turns tail and runs. Over the course of the story, Luca helps Matti learn how to lean on others and ask for help, while Luca, in turn, grows to take accountability and puts in the effort to get his act together and step into the responsibilities that he's been running from in order to become someone Matti deserves. There is a fun little twist in this story that I had not been expecting at all, and it was so juicy. I just remember being in the middle of work and being absolutely scandalized when it was revealed. I will say that this book does have spice. I wasn't entirely surprised by it, but I also didn't know that it was gonna be there, so when it happened, I was worried that a coworker might hear Omari Douglas absolutely performing his heart out from my headphones. I'm not joking. This man was panting into the microphone. Overall, I'd give this maybe a 4 to a 4.5 stars. The story was fun, the characters were great, Omari was committed to his role as a bottom, but I think my favorite thing about this book had to be the fact that its premise was based on the origin of the best man tradition, which for those who don't know the history of this tradition, the best man was just a hired sword that ensured no one tried to interrupt an arranged marriage and steal the bride. I don't think I've ever read a book that had that before, so it was really fun to see it being done. Next up on the list, we have Sorcery and Small Magics by Maiga Doocy. This was another one that I hadn't expected to like as much as I did, and I was pretty devastated when I finished it and found out that it's the only book in the series that's been published as of now, because right away I wanted to read the sequel, and it's not out yet. This is a rivals to lovers story that follows Leah Vander Lovage, who is a scriber, and Sebastian Grimm, who is a caster. The magic system in this book is really unique to me. It basically has two types of magic users. Scribers are able, I think they're able to cast like very small minor cantrips, but the main thing that they're able to do is compose spells. They can't really cast high level spells, but they write them. Meanwhile, casters are the ones actually able to cast magic and like higher spells, but if they don't have a spell that's been composed by a scriber, they have no access to magic. I really like this idea of having two types of magic users who have to rely on each other. Like, you can't just cast magic at will, you need the help of another person and work in tandem with them. That's another thing that I don't think I've read in any book where magic did exist in the setting, and it made things more interesting to me. I like reading books with outlined magic systems, and I like when the magic has limits. It makes the story feel like the stakes are higher because there's only so much the main characters can do with it, and there are obstacles that keep them from being able to rely on magic to solve all of their problems. So Leo is a highborn scriber at this magic school that I unfortunately can't remember the name of. He's very flippant and doesn't actually care about his studies. The only reason he's attending is because his father had told him that if he doesn't, he won't inherit the estate that had belonged to his mother, and that place is really important to him. Ooh, I'm sweating. By attending this school, his father hopes that he'll get his acts together and try to show off to recruiters, because while his scribing is somewhat unconventional, he's very talented when he actually puts effort into it. The only issue is that there's a certain level of magics that Leo refuses to attempt. Every time he tries to compose higher level magics, something goes wrong. So he's convinced that it's impossible for him, and so he would just rather spend his time gambling and playing his violin. Sebastian, on the other hand, is the exact opposite of Leo. He's a very talented caster from a poor farming family. He's sort of the top student of this school, and he takes his studies very seriously. At first, he comes off as a bit of a snob, but later you learn that he's like that because he's one of the only low-born people there, and he has to work really hard just to be on the same playing field as all of these privileged rich kids. He especially dislikes Leo because he has all this potential and opportunities as a noble, but he just squanders it all. Sebastian was my favorite character personally. I love those types of characters who came from nothing and are doing all this hard work and putting up with annoying rich people just to have the chance to do something good for his family and community. Leo and Sebastian are grouped together essentially for like a class assignment, and during that time a forbidden high-level spell gets mixed in with Leo's spells, and Sebastian accidentally casts it without realizing what it is, and now Leo is compelled to do everything that he tells him. They can't go to the faculty for help because if they're found out that they got their hands on and cast this forbidden spell, it could get them both expelled. So now they have to work together to try and find a way to break it. They end up chasing a rumor of a sorceress who is capable of breaking curses like this one, which leads them into the Unquiet Forest, which is infested with monsters and bandits. Just like in Swordcrossed, these two have really good chemistry and interactions. There were times when Leo annoyed me because he tends to be very self-destructive, and I don't really like when people intentionally just ruin things in their lives, but we eventually learn more about why Leo struggles with powerful magics and experienced something traumatic as a child that caused him to stop practicing it. It was at that point where I started to like Leo more, and I feel like he was a more well-rounded, three-dimensional character with a lot of depth. They're both very well-rounded characters, and I just had a lot of fun reading it. I give this book another 4 to 4.5 stars. The only complaint I had was it kind of dropped this twist that, like, Leo had been in love with Sebastian this whole time, and he just didn't even realize it. I don't necessarily hate that, but I prefer when the affection starts at 0 and it steadily grows. So the fact that Leo has been unknowingly in love with his rival the whole time just felt kind of for me. But aside from that, this book was so fun to read. And the final book on my list is The Sun-Blessed Prince by Lindsey Byrd. This book had a very interesting premise, in my opinion. The story revolves around the two countries of Soleb and Alalun. I really like when media has like sun and moon themes, so that was something that kind of drew me to it. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little basic. I love love interests that are opposite sun and moon themed. That Soleb worships the god of life, while Alalun is all about the goddess of death. Within this world, there are people called givers and reapers. Givers are capable of healing and even resurrection, though it's super frowned upon to resurrect people. Meanwhile, reapers kill anyone that they touch, and neither givers and reapers can die. They can die if you stab them, they'll die for maybe 2 seconds, but then they come back to life. Soleb and Alalun are locked in this endless war over a particular piece of land, and it's on this battlefield where we meet our two main characters, Elysian and Kat. Elysian is the crown prince of Soleb, as well as a giver, but no one knows this because givers aren't allowed to inherit the throne, so he has to keep his powers hidden. He's not allowed to heal or revive the people in his army, and that's extremely difficult for him because Elysian is a certified good boy. Kat is a reaper that was sent by the Queen of Alalun to assassinate the royal family of Soleb, but of course everything falls apart when he realizes Elysian can't be killed. Kat is taken as a prisoner of war, but because Elysian is such a good boy who cares about the fair treatment of people, he arranges to have Kat taken to Krutzfurt, a place where specifically givers and reapers all live, and the people of Soleb can travel there in order to relieve healing, or if they are unable to be healed, end their suffering. I remember reading somewhere that the author wrote this book during the pandemic and had a lot of big feelings about the healthcare system, and that shows in this book because there's a lot of rules and stipulations about what can and cannot be done with these powers. My biggest complaint about this book was that Elysian and Kat were only together for maybe the first 20 to 25% of the book, and after that point they were separated for the entirety of the story up until the very end. I will say though, despite them not being together for the majority of the book, the author did somehow manage to find a convincing way for these two to build the relationship between them. I have read a few books where that kind of thing happens, and when they're reunited and the feelings start to happen, it felt very unrealistic because what do you mean they're in love? They spent almost no time together. But during their time apart, Elysian and Kat continue to learn things about each other that serves to build respect and admiration for one another. So at the end, when Elysian and Kat are reunited, this relationship that they've agreed to doesn't feel like it came out of nowhere, and it did actually feel believable. I will say, while I did enjoy this story, there were times when the pacing felt a little all over the place. It's also written in first person present tense, which was a little jarring because most of the time first person narratives narratives are written in past tense. So instead of reading a sentence like Elysian did or said, it reads as Elysian does or says. I had tried to read the ebook first a few months prior before listening to the audiobook, but I really struggled to get through it. I'm not sure if it was just the writing style or I just had a lot going on in my life and I didn't have enough time to read it before the 3 weeks I had expired. But I did have a much easier time with the audiobook, and I was able to get through it finally just listening to it while I worked. I will say that this was the author's very first book, so while there were still a few rough edges, overall I still thought that the story was very good and I enjoyed it. There was a twist that I really loved regarding Kat that I hadn't seen coming, so that was just another moment where I was absolutely scandalized in the middle of work. Again, another reason why I did like this book was it had very good character development, and honestly, that's really all I mean, of course I care about, like, good story and world building, but I eat up good character development, and this book had that. One of the main characters is Elysian's younger sister, and at the start of the book, I found her kind of annoying, but over the course of the story, she went from being this sort of petulant teenager to learning how to move past her prejudice of Reapers, as well as come into her power as a giver. She had the best character development in this book, in my personal opinion, and by the end of the book, she and Kat were really close friends, and their friendship was very sweet, and I loved that. I loved that about this book. Besties. Overall, I'm torn between rating this book a 3.5 to 4 stars. Compared to all the other books that I read this month, it was not as good. There were definitely some improvements to the writing that it could have used, but I did like the premise and all of the characters, and it did have some really hard-hitting moments. This was another book that had me wanting to read the sequel immediately after I finished, only to find out that, again, it's not out yet. But it is set to release around my birthday next year, so that is something that I plan to get myself as a little treat, because I do really want to see where this story goes, and I want to see how the relationship between Kat and Elysian grows as they work together to try and bring an end to the war between their two countries. That's everything that I have for this video today. I'm really glad that I got to be able to talk about books that I read and actually loved, especially because I had never heard about any of these books except for The Sunblessed Prince. All of the others were just books that I happened to stumble across on the Libby app, and I like the idea of being able to bring more attention to them because they were all such gems, in my opinion. So yeah, if any of these sound like your cup of tea, I highly recommend giving them a read. Please read the Jasmine Throne. Thank you all for tuning in while I talk about all the gay books that I really liked. If you happened to enjoy this video, consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and maybe let me know in the comments what some of your favorite queer books are, and I'll see if I can find them with the Libby app and give them a listen. I'm so serious. I go through so many books with this job, and I just have so many on hold that I can't read right away, so at this point, I'm just adding things that look even remotely interesting because I just need more books to keep me occupied while I work. Please give me recommendations. In the meantime, make sure that you all take care of yourselves, and as always, remember to keep it real. Ooh.